Welcome to Socialism for All. This is S4A Livestream number 59 being recorded on Saturday, October 29, 2022. I thought that the last stream was going to be the last stream of the week, but actually we had COVID content left over and there's some other stuff we can get into anyway, so I thought, hey, why not? Now, the third stream of the week, we may have the content to do 3 streams. I don't always have the energy to do 3 streams. So we're going to do what we can. Last stream was really good. We had a really good chat, I thought, and a dense stream as far as, content. We hit a lot of different topics and it moved really fast and people brought up good questions and topics and it was a good chat. And so I'm hoping for that again. And we're going to finish the COVID content where we have some odds and ends as well. So there was a post recently, this topic of quiet quitting. And so Business Insider put out a post, you can see it down at the bottom, the era of quiet quitting is already over. Quiet quitting is a bullshit term that, the capitalist media made up basically, where it was like people just doing the minimum of their job. In other words, doing the job that you got hired for. That's what they're calling quiet quitting, is basically not going above and beyond to constantly kiss ass and, do things that you weren't hired to do and everything like that. They're calling it quiet quitting. And so they wrote about it. You can see the graphic there of the fire being lit under the ass of the worker. And they wrote, workers are sensing the shift in the mounting headlines about company layoffs, the budget cuts limiting raises, and the heightened scrutiny of their productivity. The smart ones, according to the capitalists, are adjusting their behavior accordingly. So basically, they're saying, haha, you workers had your fun fucking with us for a few months, but now it's over. We're turning up the heat on you and don't think that you can slack anymore. And, I reacted strongly to this, and I think that this is a really key thing for working people, proletarians, to understand, whether you're currently employed or not. But in general, what is the understanding of what we are going to get out of jobs, out of life under capitalism in general? My thoughts: never take your employer's interests to heart. They can never take our interests to heart. They are, after all, diametrically opposed. So why should we be their suckers? There are way more of us than there are of them. Why do we need to be the ones who make that compromise? Obviously, this is what organizing for proletarian power is all about. So organize, sabotage, resist, and if they fire you, then fuck them and keep moving. The only way to an actually good life is by abolishing capitalism, not abolishing your dignity, which is what capitalists constantly demand from you. So I really can't stress that enough. Being a suck up to capitalists will not get you anywhere but on the hook for a lifestyle that you can't really afford. They get you sucked into those expectations, and then you're just going to sell yourself out over and over again in order to maintain that lifestyle. Whether it's a mortgage that you're struggling to pay for, whatever it is, they get your expectations up, and that's how they keep you working through stuff that you shouldn't be working through. So that's how they keep you coming back to be exploited for them over and over again. Bottom line is, a good life in capitalism for proletarians? No, forget that. Instead, we fight. Now, I ran out of characters there, but just to expand on that concept a little bit, basically, there's a lot of people who keep chasing conditions under capitalism. It's true that we, to a certain extent, do want the best conditions that we can obtain, but not for just the sake of comfort. We seek conditions specifically to wage class struggle more effectively. Those are the conditions that we seek. It's not just conditions of being comfortable, which, the point is not specifically to be uncomfortable. I don't know that there's especially a virtue in that. But being too comfortable definitely can make people complacent and lazy and can lessen the class struggle. You don't want to get sucked into the thinking that, we can have conditions under capitalism that are sufficient, that, that can be what we fight for. That can be our goal. No. So, the idea of having a good life in capitalism, the only way we're ever really going to get a good life as proletarians, really, is under socialism, is by abolishing capitalism. So, this is just constantly the struggle that you're going to be in. I mean, our interests are diametrically opposed to that of our employers. They want maximal productivity for minimal pay. They want you to do the most work that they can get you to do while paying you as little as they possibly can get away with and still retain you. And you want the exact opposite. You want to be paid as much as possible for as little of your labor time as possible. So, yeah, anyway, bottom line there. Let's dial down the expectations of what is even possible in capitalism, and that should not be what we're fighting for. Instead, we fight for an end to that system. So that came up. Other things in the odds and ends barrel. So Elon Musk bought Twitter, and really no one should be as rich as Elon Musk, but I feel like especially Elon Musk should not be as rich as Elon Musk. Some interesting things going on with the hairline, which, by the way, you know, many men experience some kind of pattern balding or whatever. That's kind of a normal and natural thing. He seems to be a bit insecure about it, though. But honestly, you know, I posted that just because that thought gripped me. Like, you know, talk about undeserving. Just one of those people you don't want to really see succeed. Now, of course, success in capitalism is based on exploitation and impoverishment of other people, etc. Plus, I mean, he's not exactly this sort of bootstraps outsider. Anybody that rich is involved in all kinds of, you know, maintenance of the imperialist status quo, and there's contracts there and things like that. But, you know, I posted that, and you get all these sort of weird Elon Musk, like, bot accounts and just weirdos kind of coming out of the woodwork to be like, you don't like capitalism because you're lazy, and he's successful and he's rich and you don't like that. No, I don't like the system that made him rich while literally making other people poor to make him rich. And so hence the follow-up. There literally is no poorer use of your time than standing somebody like Elon Musk. Like, whatever other thing you could be doing, it's going to be more productive than giving moral support to the world's richest person. If you need to be told that, I mean, and a lot of people did in that thread need to be told that, but it is what it is. So now that Musk has bought it, he is a, quote, free speech absolutist, and different outlets were reporting that they were seeing all kinds of, you know, Nazi troll accounts popping up, posting like vile racist shit, the likes of which people had not seen for a while on the site. And this was literally one day into Musk's reign over Twitter, which, why does it matter? I mean, lots of people use this site for news and discussion, and it was unlike a Facebook where the board of Facebook is like far-right Republican activists and things like that. I did a video on that, I think 2 years ago. Facebook equals Fashbook was the title of the video. You know, it's these social media outlets are getting bought up by, I mean, obviously all the people who own them are rich. They're not all specifically far-right activists, though, but that seems to be increasingly the case. Anyway, content warning, racism coming up. But this was an account that I saw interacting with somebody. Obviously, you can see the name of the account and the handle are both explicitly racist. And I reported like half a dozen of their tweets for being overtly anti-Jewish, anti-black, like any kind of just vile fascist filth that you could imagine. They were tweeting out. And obviously, again, the account itself being racist as well, which is reportable. Look at the handle. So yeah, 24 hours later, the account's still up and everything. So I'm wondering if the site is going to start going down into, you know, the sleazy morass of like the kind of stuff that Twitter was better than some of the other sites at preventing. So anyway, if you are watching and you're on Twitter, you might want to report that account as a kind of experiment, see how long it stays up. Now that we are in, you know, Musk got in and started firing content moderators and all kinds of stuff, which is, you know, this is what they want to do. They want, you know, free speech is basically mainly supporting hate speech. That's what it's allowing. It's destructive speech that does not help anybody, really just reinforces division and wastes a lot of people's time and energy. So, probably Elon Musk bought the site to destroy it because that's not really in capitalist interest. Having a space where people can come together and talk about socially constructive, socially positive, anti-capitalist, anti-fascist things. So, anyway, there's that. But what else do we have in the grab bag of stuff today? Speaking of Twitter, so you can find the darndest things on there. Now, this guy, I posted this, somebody asked, is this a MAGA communist? And kind of, it is a Pat Sock, Dust James. I think I did a video on him one time talking about the Jason Unruh and Infracell debate. And somebody said, yeah, is he a MAGA communist? I mean, sort of, but he was more in the Caleb Maupin sphere of things. I think he was beefing with Infracell for a while. But anyway, the end result is not that different. So you get some Russia is not imperialist stuff here. This was quite a take. I really didn't have much other comment on it, but to repost it and say, enjoy. So the take was Russia is capitalist but not imperialist. Well, no. It's right in the title, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. Politsterm and Marxist Paul both did very good, succinct 20 or 25-minute videos on is Russia imperialist? Yes, they meet all the criteria of being, not in the ascendant, small, rising stage of capitalism. They're in the consolidated monopoly state of capitalism, and they're expanding and all that stuff. So anyway, it continues. Russian capitalism is not pre-imperialist, but post-imperialist. What the hell kind of basis do you have for saying that? This is some whole new theoretical framework here that obviously doesn't get elaborated on ever because what can you say? It's post-imperialist. What? So not being allowed to join the dying imperialist powers. So imperialism is still large and in charge. It's the dominant force on Earth right now. They have been forced by the rising socialist powers to develop a holdover capitalism where a monopoly stage is impossible. This is wrong in about 20 different ways. Just what can you say? They're not allowed to join the dying imperialist powers. Okay, so I guess he's referring to like NATO, USA, EU, that post-World War II bloc of, those, quote, Western powers. Yes, it's true that after the USSR was destroyed and Russia reverted to capitalism, that they were not welcomed with open arms into NATO and things like that. But, so according to this, they were forced by the rising socialist powers, like who exactly? To develop a holdover capitalism. No socialist country forced Russia to develop capitalism. That was an anti-communist coup that did that. Bizarre. So the rising socialist powers have forced Russia to develop a holdover capitalism. That's extraordinarily vague. Where a monopoly stage is impossible. But that is what they have. So how is it impossible if that is what they have? And how and why and who are these socialist powers forcing them to do that? What a bizarre take. But this is, your brain on being a Patsock, Maupinite, LaRouche person. Anyway, just stumbled across that. That was a real moment. All right. I know we have at least one other thing, which is the John Fetterman and Oz debate out of, speaking of garbage takes that you can find on social media. So there's John Fetterman there. For people who don't know, he is running for the Senate in Pennsylvania. And the Senate is really close between Democrats and Republicans. And the outcome of this race could tip the balance in one direction or the other as far as who is the majority. So the Republicans are running Dr. Oz, celebrity, physician who is the usual sort of, reality star type huckster person that the Republican Party runs. Now, it's important to remember the Democrats and the Republicans, this is basically a dog and pony show. Most of the same interests fund and control both parties. So, the country is roughly split between them. Some regions lean in one direction or the other. As far as substantial differences, again, dog and pony show. So Fetterman tweets out, and he has a clip of the video, which I'll show the video in a second. He tweets out, "I'll always stand up to China, and anyone that threatens the union way of life." What? So China's not threatening the union way of life, but we'll get into that. "We know that Oz won't get tough on China. I'm actually the only candidate on this stage who hasn't praised China or done business there." And then ends with, "Make more stuff here in America." Let's play the clip. So let me dig this out. But, he was getting hammered on this in the comments for doing, Cold War and yellow Peril stuff. There's just no... who does this appeal to? And as I commented there, this is exactly what Trump did as well. Here we go.
We also be able to make more in Pennsylvania and make more in America. When he had a choice to make his merchandise, the Oz label is on, he made it all in China. Who can you believe that can fight against inflation and pushing back against corporate greed, or somebody that is choosing working in China versus over American workers?
Okay. Now, there was a bit of a speech issue there. Fetterman had a stroke, and, that's fine. People have strokes, but it definitely did affect the performance as well. This was actually his opening to the debate. So typically, if people say something other than hello or good day, as a greeting, they would say good evening if it was, later in the day. He opened with good night. I found this kind of hard to believe, but here it is.
As lieutenant governor, you're running for a seat that could decide the balance of power in Washington. What qualifies you to be a U.S. senator? You have 60 seconds.
Hi, good night, everybody. I'm running to serve Pennsylvania. He's running to use Pennsylvania.
Again, just odd. This was the whole tone of the debate. Actually, Chuck Schumer was caught on a hot mic talking to Biden. His comments on this debate were that it, quote, didn't hurt us too much. Here it is.
That seat, we're in danger of that seat. Well, it looks like the debate didn't hurt us as much in Pennsylvania as it today, so that's good. And we're picking up steam for that.
Yeah, so this is the Democratic Party. You're running against a absolute clown car in the Republican Party. And this is the best that you can do, is sort of barely scraping by. This is why I say dog and pony show. It would not be hard to do better than this if we had fair and free elections, but that's not the way that this works. And, again, more social democrats need to realize that. Anyway, in comment, I replied, "This is utter horseshit. China didn't threaten the union way of life. Your party, the Democrats, never passed card check." What's card check? Card check is something that would greatly simplify the union creation process. Basically, if you get a majority of workers in a proposed bargaining unit to sign their authorization cards, which normally would trigger the NLRB to come in and do a union election. National Labor Relations Board is the NLRB. If you got a majority up front, then if the election were held that day, you would win. That's card check. It would greatly simplify the process because usually employers use the period between the, basically the signing of A cards and then the 6 to 8 weeks that elapses between then and when the election's actually done. They use it to whittle away at the support for the union, to fire union activists and things like that. So it's very hard to form a union in the United States in a workplace where there isn't one presently. If we had card check, it'd be much better, much easier. There would be a lot more unions. And of course, unions themselves are not necessarily radical or militant, but it's another place that socialists can go in and engage in ideological struggle. I'm having the same technical issue that I was having a couple streams ago with the screen locking. The audio is still being. I think that the audio is still being recorded. Let me just continue. Sorry for the technical glitch here. Anyway, buys corporations, countries, capitalists get real about that this is the nature of capitalism, but they're going to talk about China instead. They're going to blame some other country that, what did China do? They opened their doors for U.S. capitalists to come in, and U.S. China didn't force U.S. capitalists to go in there. The capitalists went in seeking cheaper labor and another market to sell their products in. And that's the way capitalism works. So basically, Democrats like Fetterman are just gaslighting people and tweeting out this kind of anti-China shit, just like Trump. There are some minor differences between these parties. On major policy, they're pretty much the same. So anyway, just honestly depressing stuff looking into the state of U.S. electoral politics. But this is, you can't expect anything else out of it. And we need to put together a coalition of left groups to take on this entire system, not just electorally, but in many other ways. In fact, primarily in other ways. Talked about that need in a number of different streams. Anyway, as far as what else is new, odds and ends, there is a post that I put up on the community tab of the YouTube page recently, which had to do with something out of Russia. Speaking of, the post-imperialists themselves. Now, where did I put this link? So there is a Russian politician, Nina Ostanina, who is a communist with KPRF, Communist Party of the Russian Federation. Let's play the clip, actually, of her talking about LGBTQ plus workers, or just people in general, as, quote, ideological weapons. Here we go.
Сегодня понимание того, что защищать нужно от наступления вот этого.
Actually, you know what? Let me back this up. The video came out in like super huge size, and you need to see the subtitles if you don't speak Russian. So, all right, let's redo that.
Сегодня понимание того, что защищать нужно от наступления вот этого идеологического оружия, ибо война идет по всем фронтам, понимание это, наверное, есть у всех, и в защите нуждается и взрослое население.
So that is a KPRF, quote, communist, speaking about an anti-LGBTQ law, which this has been kind of a thing in Russia for a while now. And here's the KPRF helping Putin and the Russian bourgeoisie to push repressive policy. If this shit is from the Stone Age, we need to move on from this. There's no excuse for this at this point. It is just helping, like I said, it's helping capitalist repression. So here's a story, just elaborate. I wanted to go get some additional information about this. So this is from a website called Meduza. It's sort of Russian dissident journalism. It is what it is. I don't, know. I did a little bit of background reading about it, but I don't read it regularly. Anyway, there's a story. The president likes the topic. Russian lawmakers develop competing bills in a race to amend, quote, the gay propaganda law, sources tell Meduza. This is from a couple months ago in July. So that's what Ostanina was talking about here. So on Monday, State Duma lawmakers, that's their parliament, put forward a bill that would broaden Russia's existing gay propaganda law. The proposed amendments would ban the, quote, denial of family values, as well as the, quote, promotion of non-traditional sexual orientations. Meduza sources close to the Kremlin say that this particular bill is unlikely to be adopted, mainly because it wasn't authored by lawmakers from the ruling party. But they also say that United Russia has a similar initiative in the works. So, people often will say that the KPRF tails Putin, and that's why they're tolerated, their existence is tolerated. I think this is probably a good example of that. Anyway, On July 18, a group of lawmakers from the Communist Party and A Just Russia submitted a bill to the State Duma on banning, quote, the denial of family values and the promotion of non-traditional sexual orientations. Again, there's absolutely no excuse for this in any way, shape, or form. In the bill's explanatory note, the authors argued that denying family values, whatever that is, promoting the, quote, child-free lifestyle, and, quote, popularizing non-traditional sexual orientations are no less dangerous to the development of Russian society than the promotion of suicide. That's insane. Drugs, again, drugs, the monolith of drugs, all drugs are the same apparently. Extremism, okay. And you know you're invading a country right now, but anyway, and other types of illegal behavior. The proposed bill echoes the infamous gay propaganda law that Russia adopted in 2013. Among other things, the 2013 legislation amended the Code of Administrative Offenses with Article 6.21, which outlines penalties for, quote, promoting non-traditional sexual orientations among minors. You know that there are minors that have non-traditional, that's not really a thing either, non-heterosexual sexual orientations. So again, trying to equate heterosexuality with tradition. No, that's just what was traditionally allowed for in society for various purposes of social control stemming from patriarchal property relations and things like that. So there's nothing non-traditional about orientations other than being heterosexual. That's been around forever. It's found in non-human animals as well. It's a common thing. But so they're just lying to you off the bat. Anyway, individuals found guilty can be jailed for up to 15 days, while organizations can be fined up to 1 million rubles, $17,000, or forced to suspend operations for up to 90 days. In practice, the statute has been used to persecute LGBTQ+ rights activists. The authors of the new draft law believe that the 2013 legislation didn't go far enough. They even argue that the, quote, approval and recognition of, quote, non-traditional sexual orientations poses demographic and economic threats. The bill's authors also proposed imposing additional restrictions on Russia's film industry, including an explicit ban on issuing distribution certificates to films that, quote, promote the denial of family values and non-traditional sexual orientations, unquote. The draft legislation does not clarify what constitutes promotion or the denial of family values, nor does it outline specific penalties for violations. Among the bill's authors are Nina Ostanina, KPRF, who heads the State Duma Committee on Family Issues, Nikolai Berlyaev, there you go, I wanted to put the Y in the wrong place, A Just Russia, and Rodina party leader Alexei Zhuravlev, a member of the LDPR faction. In a recent interview, Ostanina connected the development of the new draft law to Vladimir Putin signing a decree establishing July 8 as Family Day in Russia. Quote, for us, a traditional family is a union of a man and a woman. Its children, it's a multi-generational family. And the promotion of child-free in this case is just promoting the rejection of traditional family values, the lawmaker told news.ru. Well, that's fine for you, but not everybody wants that, and not everybody who wants that, what is the danger here? If your, quote, communism that you're supposedly promoting can't survive the existence of LGBTQ+ people who've existed since the dawn of time, what kind of communism is it exactly? But of course, it's the kind of communism that, just tails the Russian bourgeoisie. So whatever, there she is there. In the same interview, Ostanina accused well-known directors Kirill Serebrennikov and Konstantin Bogmalov of, quote, promoting non-traditional relationships. A few days later, on July 21st, Ostanina proposed making the dissemination of gay propaganda a criminal offense. Of course, you can make heterosexual propaganda, heteronormative stuff, all day long. That's fine. Why is that okay and the rest is not? Do they say, is there some, you want to give me the Marxism on this, please? Anyway, just absolute. This is utterly reactionary. There's nothing slightly revolutionary about this at all. What a fucking just toilet of a dumpster fire. Words fail. Nina Ostanina did not respond to Meduza's questions. A local initiative. According to Meduza's sources close to the Kremlin, the bill put to the State Duma grew out of another piece of draft legislation. On June 7, the Sevastopol Legislative Assembly submitted a very similar bill proposing penalties for the promotion of non-traditional sexual orientations. Again, they're trying to bludgeon you with tradition. Tradition in this case is just previous stages of class society that were less progressive than the one we're in now. The document outlined an extremely vague definition of promotion, but it did not contain clauses pertaining to the denial of family values. The proposed penalties included fines ranging from 40 to 50,000 rubles, approximately $685 to $855 for individuals, and on up to about 86,000 for legal entities, or the forced suspension of operations for up to 90 days. State Duma Chairman Vyacheslav Volodin sent the draft law to the Parliament's Committee on Legislation for consideration, but the committee deemed it unconstitutional. According to Meduza's sources in the State Duma, the committee rejected the bill because it was a local initiative that hadn't been coordinated with Putin's executive office, the presidential administration, or the State Duma leadership. Two sources close to the Putin administration also stressed that the idea put forward by the Sevastopol legislators interested Volodin himself. Quote, "We need to strengthen the institution of the family, surround our loved ones with love, care, and attention. With the withdrawal from the Council of Europe, demands to legalize same-sex marriage in Russia have become a thing of the past. Attempts to impose alien values on our society have failed." So in other words, LGBTQ plus people don't exist in Russia. That's an alien thing. Only people in Europe do that, etc. This is just, we know better than this. We have known better than this for such a long time, and this is just a gigantic step backward. Introducing a ban on the promotion of non-traditional values is the right thing to do. According to a Meduza source, the State Duma chairman, quote, "is aware that initiatives ostensibly aimed at defending, quote, traditional values are likely to score points with Vladimir Putin. Quote, the president likes the topic of defending traditional values, especially in opposition to the West." By the way, if you're out there on English-speaking social media promoting this stuff, congrats, you're a stooge. You're just an absolute tool. This is not even slightly Marxist at all. You're just promoting the bourgeoisie of another country. It has nothing to do with socialism. It has nothing to do with fighting imperialism. Nothing at all. It's the creation of a parallel reactionary society that's in competition with this reactionary society. Volodin is showing that he's protecting the country's interests in the rear while Putin is captivated by the front. Imposing an agenda. Meduza's sources presume that Volodin was the one behind the new gay propaganda bill. However, the fact that there isn't a single... Sorry, I think my mic got muted there for a second, and I'm not sure where it got cut off. I'm really not sure what happened with that. But anyway, the text is up on the screen. Let me just back up for a second. But the sources also pointed out that in any case, whether it gets adopted or not, Volodin has, quote, managed to impose an agenda on his colleagues in the State Duma. Indeed, on July 11, United Russia lawmaker Alexander Kinstein proposed amending the existing gay propaganda law so that it applies to adult audiences, not just minors. According to Kinstein, who heads the State Duma Committee on Informational Policy, the ban would extend to offline statements, publications in the media and on social networks, and online cinemas. So they really want, this is don't say gay to like an extreme level. The State Duma would presumably consider the relevant draft legislation during the fall session. Vyacheslav Volodin and Alexander Kinstein did not respond to Meduza's questions prior to publication. Meduza's sources close to the Kremlin believe that this will be the piece of legislation that gets adopted in the end, but its form remains unknown. So far, officials in the Putin administration and United Russia have only discussed the, quote, contours of the bill. So that's some of the stuff that's going on over there. And of course, we have plenty of stuff similar to it going on in the United States. But do we have, quote, communists trying to argue that it's somehow Marxist, progressive, anti-imperialist? No, you would never argue that. So it also isn't in this case either. All right. So we're done with that for now. And so is the audio back now? It should be, because I'm seeing the monitor. I'm going back into the chat at this point. Okay, good. All right, well, let's check in with the chat for a while before we get back to the COVID stuff from yesterday and see what's going on here. And yeah, let's proceed. All right. Well, I lost a little bit of the chat, unfortunately, but we have it back for back to like a half an hour. I think I'm seeing a troll in there. Again, just a reminder, don't engage with the trolls. It just clogs up the chat and makes everything harder to read, makes it less pleasant for everybody, including me. All right, good. The audio is back. Yeah, I'm not hearing the audio in my monitor, so I don't know exactly what's happening. The technology is not cooperating today. Okay, anyway. Yeah, somebody, I think, out there defending the competitive prices in the market. No. I heard that Trump is back on Twitter. Musk is offering to let every banned account back on, including Trump. I think Trump is trying to... Trump's position was he was glad that Twitter is, quote, back in sane hands, but he is committed to his Twitter copycat site, Truth Social, for the time being. One of the most worrying things, I think, is Kanye and the anti-Semitism that's growing mainstream. He apparently lost about $2 billion worth of contracts or something like that after all of this anti-Semitism stuff. So I don't know, how that impacts him. One estimation said that he was probably worth about $400 million right now. He had to give up the private school that he owned, I think. So he's kind of circling the drain right now. The thing is, West is somebody who stood up and, I don't think he invented all of the anti-Semitic stuff he was saying, but it is, it's probably the other rich fascists whispering in his ear, and he was stupid enough to start saying it openly out loud. And then other people in the system reminded him, hey, we don't do that stuff overtly, only covertly. And, he got slapped down and obviously sanctioned for it. I mean, he still has $400 million, so it is what it is for him. So, yeah. I don't know. There was somebody commenting on that whole situation. He ran for president in 2020. He said that he's going to run again. People are trying to say, it's not political. It's political. He's running for office. He's buying Parler, a social media site, which, that's another thing people do when they're running for office as fascists, because they use it to mine the user's data off of it. So, yeah. A lot of disgusting stuff going on right now. It's hard to... oh, wow. Even a neighbor of mine has never spoken to me again after he, quote, found out I was Jewish. I got to say, I've never really understood that. It was one of those things like you learn about the Nazis, and to me, I always thought it was in the past. And then, later in life, I encountered some like hardcore anti-Jewish, basically fascists. I didn't realize at first that they were fascists. But I thought it was like some kind of weird bad joke or something. because obviously there were no Jewish people around them saying that stuff and posting it, and it was like, is this for real? Like, it took me a while to really for it to dawn on me that, like, no, this is real, it never fully went away, etc. This was, further back in my political awakening, let's say. But yeah, no, for anybody struggling with, is this stuff really real? No, they're not just trolling. Like, this is a real thing. It's a product of capitalism. They scapegoat various groups to take heat off of the system during times of crisis. Jewish people are one of those groups. And, they don't want to make out the system's failures to be the system's failures. They want to scapegoat some particular group instead. And so they will take some minority or multiple minorities, and that's what they'll do. But yeah, I thought that society had kind of moved on from that. This was before I understood capitalism as I do now. But yeah, that took me a while, and wound up rubbing elbows with people where it was like, holy shit, this is fucked up. It's why I talk about in the 2000s how libertarians were getting into the anti-war movement and stuff like that. They were elbowing their way into all these spaces, and just brought absolutely filth with them. And that was an example of that. And it was like, it was hard to believe for me. And then it took me a while, like, how are people actually this stupid? But people are really, really pushing it. So Hieronymus, I'm going to take those questions some other time. As far as more works from Ho Chi Minh, maybe. There's like a whole bunch of short Ho Chi Minh works that are up online at MIA. And I don't know, like, a lot of them are so short, you have to do them in like one video as kind of a compilation. And I don't know, it just hasn't been a high priority at the time, like when I was considering it. So I kind of shelved it for now. And then I'm not familiar with the Counterpower organization. As far as, okay, so I'm winding up answering these anyway. Between dialectical materialism and historical materialism, you can find people who say different things, but that historical materialism is an instance of dialectical thinking applied to history. So that's a bit non-specific, but that should point you in the right direction. Lol Fetterman, the dude that supports Israel. I mean, I think that's pretty much mandatory if you're in the capitalist Democratic Party. I mean, the very few people like Rashida Tlaib, who or Ilhan Omar that even like suggest maybe Israel is not worthy of unconditional support. You look at what happens with that, and these are not, stellar. These are not socialists in the first place, but still, it's like stepping out of line for 2 seconds is 2 seconds too many for the rest of the Democratic Party. This is why my Maoist friends do not vote in federal elections, because it is a dog and pony show. Yeah, I mean, if you want to vote for a non-Democrat, non-Republican party, I don't think any harm is done, but it's your call. A lot of times, I think if your state does local or like, statewide referendums on the ballot, like some of the states will put things like minimum wage on the ballot or something, vote for it. Even in a lot of cases, I think I'm going to do a video on this next week, but even in the cases where that stuff gets put on the ballot, like, some of the states have legalized cannabis and stuff like that, or decriminalized, the implementation of it, or of minimum wage or whatever, it gets, it'll get voted for by the people in that area or city or like state or whatever. And then the government, whether it's city or state or whatever, will not implement it for like years. So even that, I mean, it's fodder for agitation to do things like that, and then to show how the system does not work properly. It doesn't mean that not voting for anything ever is always the correct course. I mean, basically the Leninist position on this is use the elections for propaganda to build consciousness. Again, what we were talking about before, you're never going to get the living conditions you want, like on an open-ended basis under capitalism. So it always has to be couched in terms of the struggle to abolish capitalism, and not just to like make ourselves more comfortable within capitalism. So, you know, if there's stuff that can be used in agitation against, hey, here's something we need, and people even directly voted for it, and the government is still denying the popular will, you can make hay out of that. I mean, you can agitate on it. So, you know, there can be value to that. And this is kind of the point of when Marxists do run in elections, is to agitate off of it, you know. It may not always make sense, and it may not always be the best use of a group's resources to run in an election, but yeah. Dr. Oz running for Senate, what? Sometimes I feel like they're powering down the simulation with how absurd things get. Yeah, it's really bad. Can you think of a more ridiculous candidate? I mean, I'm sure that there are some. Well, actually, you know what? There is a more ridiculous candidate, because in that Schumer clip that I showed, and he's talking about the race in Georgia is where they're really in trouble. Herschel Walker. Talk about absurd situations. But Warnock is, this was the whole $1,400 check, and where's the $600? They were like, hey, if you vote for Warnock and who was the other one? I forget. But yeah, we'll give you the other $600 or whatever, and then they just didn't. So anyway, apparently in some of the polls, which I think are Republican-leaning polls, so take it with a grain of salt, but Herschel Walker is up by like 5 points. So this is the situation we're in. It is a dog and pony show between the Democrats and Republicans. It's not actually run seriously between them. It's controlled by basically the same people. The only real concern that the capitalists have is keeping the center of the conversation between the Democrats and Republicans, and not letting, you know, other people into it. So the times when we can actually force some other conversation, you know, that's actually helpful. You know, and you can probably even win some local seats, keyword being some there, but the point is always using it for propaganda, not just like results in and of itself. Bit of a tangent on my part, but anyway, I remember seeing this meme one time where it showed a picture of two fountain drink dispensers. They were both water, except one label looked slightly different, and the meme itself said American elections. Yeah, there's many you know, references to things like that. You know, two wings of the same bird, whatever it is. And, you know, defenders of the Democratic Party will be able to point out some, like, superficial differences between them that can even have some impact on people's lives. The problem is, no matter what, things still get worse. No matter how many times the Democratic Party gets elected, we're always on this sort of the end of democracy, teetering on the point of oblivion thing. The Democrats have had major power over and over again over the last 20 years, and they don't really fight the Republican Party, you know, because they're not meant to really fight the Republican Party. They could ally with the left, enact popular reforms, send the Republicans into the dustbin of history, turn them into just a regional party with no real sway in national politics. But then the Democrats would have to face off against the left, and that's the last thing that the people who actually rule this country, the capitalists, want. No clue why Fetterman chose to go forward with the debate. It was painful. People decline to debate all the time without it really affecting them. So, until capitalism is abolished, we'll continue getting shit and treated like shit. Yeah. I'm having deja vu in the chat. Again, technology day. I feel like the chat, it just like jumped back up to the top. I'm reading through stuff again now. What is going on? They used to blame Mexico for threatening the union way of life up until very recently because of NAFTA and now AMCTA or TMEC. So Putin is a post-imperialist neo-Marxist. Yeah. These are the kind of takes you get here. This is what we're trying to organize around and against in this country. Being a socialist in the U.S. is extraordinarily difficult. We also have to remember that Alexander Dugin, neo-fascist, wrote the founding charter of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. Yeah, I mean, it's probably designed from the start to be what it is today. You would think with all of that communist memorabilia left laying around Russia, they would at least read a copy of Engels' The Origin of the Family, Property, and the State, for fuck's sake. Correct. Some states in the U.S. also have Family Day as well, like in Nevada they have Family Day. Did not know that. Nevada, excuse me. I believe they just need more working force as they have birth deficits and low life expectancy. Does it work well, though? I mean, does it really work? I mean, it doesn't stop LGBTQ plus people from existing. It creates definitely a harsher climate to exist in, and it, somebody who gets pregnant, but has mixed feelings about it, whatever, like it can be harder. They might be more likely to like bring the pregnancy to term and things like that. But like, is this really making significant impacts in the overall, birth rate or whatever it is? Like, I would need to see that demonstrated somehow. It seems gratuitous and not that effective, actually, to me. Traditionally, Russians used to be pagan. Does that mean that Putin is going to ban the Russian Orthodox Church for promotion of non-traditional religious orientation? Yeah, it's which stage of class society exactly do you want to go back to? And the answer is just whatever happens to serve the bourgeoisie at the moment. Again, Marxists supporting that is beyond absurd. Is the establishment putting a spotlight on LGBT issues to provoke a response from the left? No. No, they're not. It's about creating a more precarious, vulnerable working class, which is policed in more ways, in which there are ever more reasons for workers to be stripped of rights. It's all about just building capitalist power, shutting down proletarian unity, keeping workers off balance and against each other. Remember, most people are very cowardly, and they really fear stepping out of line and having somebody question who they are or stand up to them or make fun of them. And that includes adults. It's not just people in high school. And, people who take it upon themselves to be gender police or sexuality police or hair police, like whatever it is, all kinds of things, what is, the morality police of one type or another. They can really take it to heart, and they can really make people's lives miserable. And again, all of this takes energy away from the class struggle, all of it. What is socialism exactly? Well, this is not exactly a 101 stream, but so what's been existing for a number of thousands of years right now is something we call class society. Prior to that, people lived as hunter-gatherers, and that was pretty much, the state of nature for humanity. at some point people became more sedentary, engaged in agriculture, and started setting up an unequal type of social organization. We call it class society. So we're currently in a stage of class society, or that formal inequality, that is called capitalism. It has particular characteristics, and the thing about class society is that it moves forward in such a way. It's constantly in change. It's constantly in flux. Capitalism creates the conditions for its own destruction. It creates a very large class called the proletariat, which doesn't have property. And the proletariat has no interest in seeing the continuation of capitalism after it's abolished the previous system, feudalism. And wow, we just got a raid of 29 people in. Welcome, Grumsterino. Anyway, so socialists are class-conscious proletarians who are organizing for the abolition of capitalism. Beyond that, we just got a raid of 50 beyond that. So there's 74 people in here. That is a new record for the channel, by the way, as we're going through like a what is socialism question. So socialism is the stage after capitalism, theorized by Marx and Engels and others. Marx and Engels helped to standardize what we call scientific socialism. Anyway, sorry, I'm still super distracted at the fact that like a huge, two big raids came in. 126 viewers. That's definitely a record. Wow. We're doing general chat right now, but yeah, that's a lot of people. Huh. I had more content, that's why I did the stream today. I definitely do not have my game face on. So like the stream has been struggling. So to all the people coming in, definitely come back next week. I mean, stick around today, but this is not a typical stream. Anyway, so yeah, socialism, it's the first time where the ruling class of society, the proletariat, is also the majority of society. And those are a few of the basics. Otherwise, on the channel, youtube.com/socialismforall, there's a file, the principles of communism. That's like a frequently asked questions file. I would refer you to that. It's very similar to the Communist Manifesto, but it's written like an FAQ. So there you go. But yeah, as far as the question, what is socialism exactly? It's a stage beyond capitalism run by working people. What exactly it looks like, it varies from place to place based on conditions. So the question can't be answered exactly as is. But that's some of the background as far as, the theory behind socialism and some of the interests of the people involved in creating it. So, all right. The first books the Nazis burned were on gender research. Hating queer people is fundamental to fascism. Yeah, and patriarchy generally. Fascism is kind of just turning up the intensity on all this. Same goes for today. So, the Democrats want to uphold the window dressing of the sham democracy, and the Republicans don't care about it. Yeah. I'll bet some of them even do believe in these. Like you look at like a Marianne Williamson or something like that. She'll go on, and it's kind of like a rich white person's view of how this country works, and like call your congressman and all this stuff. And it's just like, it's so far removed from the conditions that most people live in, and the idea to most people, to most poor working people in the United States, the idea that you're gonna like call your congressman some like rich person who's like in Washington, and that they're gonna give a shit about what you say is like, it's laughable to most people. So but she's a rich white person, and she's used to having people listen to her. So it's just, out of touch at best. But yeah, a lot of it is pretty cynical as well. But I do think that there are just some out of touch people who are like, we can restore capitalist democracy. We can do it. No. I'm in a bit of a rut. I'm a musician at a nonprofit trying to decide if I should A, unionize the workforce at the nonprofit, B, start an IWW chapter for entertainers in my city, C, Get everyone at my work to join the AFM Musicians Union to wield more power. Some of these don't sound mutually exclusive. And, I mean, as far as unionizing the workforce or getting everyone to join, that's definitely easier said than done. I don't know where you are in the process of, doing any of those things. But those can be potentially, months or years long processes. So would need more information there. Yeah, Wayland, you should stop making the argument that you're making. Saying, I support LGBT rights, I support LGBT rights, but, yeah, whenever you start writing a comment like that, it's going in the wrong direction. I just feel like it'd be pretty difficult to undo people's biases when you target issues that aren't close to their personal lives or hearts. You don't rouse the attention of the average exploited factory worker by talking about the suffering of people in lands they've been told to hate. Okay, so if the hate is the problem, undoing the hate is the solution. So I don't know what your point is exactly. We're trying to undo some of that hate, and partly by bringing together the people who already stand in opposition to that hate, and then as an organized force trying to confront that hate, because trying to confront it alone can be honestly dangerous, even life-threatening. So anyway, I just don't really see how your point leads anywhere productive, or how you're not noticing that it's not. Yeah, so the next comment in response to that was, how do we undo biases without talking about them? These are fighting words, you're saying. Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned the Biden directive where you could lose your U.S. citizenship if you kept working in China. Do you think this is another inter-imperialist move? No doubt. I actually hadn't seen that before. If you want to send me a link on that. Wow, a lot of emojis going on in the chat there. Okay, yeah. No, I haven't heard about that Biden directive. All the U.S. citizens who were working in the China tech industry had to either leave their jobs or lose their U.S. citizenship. I thought it was insane, but it's part of the no chips to China actions that Biden put in. I feel it's a bad sign / precedent. That raises a lot of questions. And you know what? I think I actually did see something about that in passing now that you mention it. I mean, are they giving them new jobs to replace them is one of the questions that comes to mind. I mean, they don't usually give a shit about what happens to workers who are just pawns in these inter-imperialist struggles. But sometimes they do give, transitional, or what do they call it? Like when they relocate workers to, or like retrain them and stuff. That's interesting. But that is intense. I'll have to look more at the no chips to China thing, because, the war over computers, obviously that's where the future lies. It's not like we're going to use fewer computers in the future. That's only going to be more and more relevant. Well, yeah, obviously I was talking about specific kinds of hate. All right, so we're caught up with the chat at this point. Why don't we go into the COVID stuff now? This might actually take us to the end of this somewhat strained third stream of the week here. So, COVID. Now, where were we? Here's my list of stuff. So we got 5 about COVID, and this is just, it's an ongoing thing. Is COVID on the ballot? No. Is really social change at all on the ballot? No. So remember this, next time somebody's twisting your arm to vote Democrat, what is actually on the ballot? I'm sure that there are some differences between the Democrats and Republicans, but questions of major import are not. All right. By and large, are not. So anyway, here's first story. Daylight robbery. Pfizer condemned for hiking U.S. COVID vaccine price by 10,000% above cost. Quote, while health workers and the vulnerable continue to go unvaccinated in developing countries, Pfizer is shamelessly fleecing the public for ever greater sums of money, said one campaigner. It's by Jake Johnson about a week ago, October 21st. Vaccine equity campaigners on Friday condemned Pfizer for announcing that it will soon raise the price of its publicly funded COVID-19 shot to between $110 and $130 per dose in the U.S., a move that comes as the Biden administration is preparing to end the nation's free coronavirus vaccine program as pandemic response funding runs dry. Reuters reported late Thursday that Angela Lukin, an executive at Pfizer, said that the New York-based pharmaceutical giant, quote, expects that the vaccine, quote, will be made available at no cost to people who have private insurance or government-paid insurance. So that's what they expect. It's not guaranteed at this point. The outlet noted that Lukin did not say whether the company will make any accommodations for the tens of millions of people in the U.S. who don't have any health insurance. The People's Vaccine Alliance said in a statement Friday that Pfizer's planned price hike would amount to a 10,000% markup above the cost of producing the vaccine, which is estimated to be as low as, get ready, $1.18 per dose, and then they're selling it for $110 to $130. The U.S. currently pays around $30 per dose for Pfizer's shot. Quote, while health workers and the vulnerable continue to go unvaccinated in developing countries, Pfizer is shamelessly fleecing the public for ever greater sums of money, said Julia Kosgei, policy advisor to the People's Vaccine Alliance. Quote, this latest obscene price hike is truly a mask-off moment for one of the great profiteers of this pandemic. In the second quarter of this year, Pfizer reported a 78% increase in overall profit compared to the same period in 2021 and said that its coronavirus vaccine revenue was $32 billion. The firm is set to report third quarter earnings early next month. This is daylight robbery, Kosgei said of the coming price increase. Governments must not stand by while companies like Pfizer hold the world to ransom in a global pandemic. This isn't just about vaccines, Kosgei added. Right now, people in developing countries are dying without access to Paxlovid, an antiviral COVID-19 treatment for which Pfizer is charging hundreds of dollars per course. But there is a proposal at the World Trade Organization that would make it easier for poorer countries to produce generic doses. It's time for governments to stand up to the pandemic profiteers and support it. Earlier this year, rich countries at the World Trade Organization tanked a popular proposal to temporarily waive coronavirus vaccine patents, a step that would help facilitate the production of generic doses for developing nations. At present, just 23.3% of people in low-income countries have received at least one coronavirus vaccine dose. So commenting, what does that mean? It means that over 3/4 of the people in low-income countries are completely non-vaccinated and are at greatest risk of hospitalization, death, the severest outcomes of COVID, and we have much worse strains of COVID now than we did in 2020, where in 2020 it could kill you or take many years off of your life. It now has mutated to a point, it's still constantly mutating. I'm going to read more about that, as we often do, because that's an ongoing story. But now you have people who are completely non-vaccinated and up against really, really nasty strains of this stuff. Pfizer, along with other pharmaceutical giants, fervently opposed the patent waiver as it sought to preserve its control over production and distribution of the shots, which were developed using government-funded technology. During a recent panel discussion, World Health Organization Director of Health Emergencies Mike Ryan said that the failure to ensure global vaccine equity and prevent millions of deaths was, quote, because of the greed of the North and the greed of the pharmaceutical industry. Quote, we failed because of the self-interest of certain member states that were not prepared to share, Ryan added. This is the story of capitalism. The Biden administration, which has faced criticism for falling short of its vaccine donations pledges, is taking steps to transition away from providing free vaccines to the U.S. public. Last panel here. As the Wall Street Journal reported in August, the shift will give, quote, more control of pricing and coverage to the healthcare industry in ways that could generate sales for companies and costs for consumers for years to come. The early stages of the transition have begun amid mounting fears of a winter spike in coronavirus infections and deaths. Just 4% of eligible people have received the newest COVID-19 booster, according to government data. By the way, I would recommend, if you have not gotten that by this point, get it. There's supposed to be a really big surge by Thanksgiving. If you get the booster now, that's going to cover you then. And honestly, it's going to be, I think, just a shit show this winter. Anyway, while the Biden administration has called for additional pandemic response funding to purchase more tests, treatments, and next-generation vaccines, the effort faces opposition from Republicans who have seized on President Joe Biden's recent claim that the, quote, pandemic is over, we covered that, to justify blocking the White House's request. So these are your Democrats. This is your pro-science people being like, oh yeah, we're in a gigantic plateau of COVID that is equal to the spread of COVID of all the previous surges except for Omicron rolled into one. Basically 2 years worth rolled into 6 months. But yeah, the pandemic's over, according to Biden. That's terrible. Quote, we know from our clinical and research experience that the pandemic is far from over and that national efforts to secure the health and well-being of the American public are far from complete, a group of health experts wrote in an open letter earlier this month. Quote, we are deeply concerned that the Biden administration is minimizing COVID at a time when it needs to be redoubling its efforts to ensure funding and resources to prevent another surge. So just to, speaking of the surge, that's the end of that article. Looking at, this is where we're at this week. And what you want to look at is the wastewater monitoring. They don't really count cases anymore. So the cases are going to look really low. They're not. They're just not counting them because people are doing rapid tests where people can even afford rapid tests because they're no longer being given for free. And but people really aren't getting the PCR tests. Those would get reported. And but we're not doing testing in schools. We're not doing testing in most workplaces and so on. And, maybe people will do a rapid test. By the way, if you do a rapid test, swab the back of your throat, swab the insides of your cheeks, swab deep into your nose, not just the outer rim of your nostrils. That will actually give you an accurate reading. It's much more likely to be accurate. If it's negative, then it's probably really negative. It's, but you can get a false negative if you don't swab thoroughly enough. So you got to actually collect a good sample. Back of your throat, cheeks, and deep up into your pharynx, which is not just your nostrils, but behind your nostrils. Okay. So anyway, this is wastewater monitoring, which detects the virus in wastewater. As you can see, pandemic is far from over, quite the opposite, in fact. Now, we can see a regional breakdown right here. The orange line is the Northeast. That's been having the biggest outbreak so far. The Midwest is that purple line that is surging. The West and the Southeast are currently kind of holding steady around 500. Probably those are going to pick up soon too. So, as it gets colder, people go indoors. There is, less ventilation. We didn't really install widespread filtration of the air. So we're just kind of going back into basically the pandemic started almost 3 full years ago. Because we're almost into November. It started in December of 2019. We're basically just a month or two shy of 3 months. And the virus has mutated into many more virulent and contagious forms. The vaccine coverage is dwindling. People aren't masking anymore. There's no quarantining and isolation. The testing is disappearing. So it's literally everything is worse now. Also, 1 million people are dead in the United States alone, and tens of millions more injured on a long-term basis from this thing, and counting. So 3 years in, everything is worse. Okay. I mean, it's a stark, depressing, shocking news. But here we are, 3 years into the pandemic, literally everything is worse. All right, speaking of booster shots, here's a story out of New York. This is from Gothamist. Extremely low booster rates suggest that the New York City area has no COVID cares left to give. The updated COVID-19 booster vaccines don't seem to be at the forefront of people's minds, even as the autumn surge creeps towards the U.S. It's hard even to find how many people are taking the shots. As of Monday morning, neither the COVID-19 dashboards for New York City nor New Jersey were displaying the numbers of bivalent boosters, which are designed to fight newer coronavirus variants. That's despite the bivalents becoming the go-to booster for anyone over the age of 12 nearly 2 months ago on September 2nd. New York officials said that the city had given out 467,221 bivalent doses as of last Wednesday, while 977 have been administered in New Jersey. However, the data on their websites isn't clear, and when counting the number of doses listed from September 2 onward, a much lower number of doses is represented, about 12,000 in each place. Officials said that this is because their dashboards are not updated. Quote, "The booster data on our site does not include bivalent doses," Patrick Gallahue, a New York City Health Department spokesperson, said via email. Updates will be made to add the bivalent numbers, but that remains a work in progress. The dashboard currently reflects the earlier booster and other additional doses for immunocompromised, etc., Nancy Carney, New Jersey Department of Health Deputy Director of Communications, said. The updated booster doses will be added shortly. This data is valuable, or these data are valuable, because they can help convey how much general interest there is in the shots and what areas might be at risk as new variants emerge. Its absence also speaks to a larger trend of people not really knowing if they should care about COVID-19 anymore, health experts said. Yes. Like, unequivocally, yes, you should care. They said that COVID-19 messaging has essentially evaporated as the midterm elections approach, which, for the love of God, I wish we had elections like every 6 years, because it is so, I gotta take a sip here, so incredibly disruptive of just everything. Every time they suck the air out of the room, politicians completely compromise and alter their messaging on everything. It's just so massively disruptive. And unfortunately, so many people are still following the kind of media sources that play into that and that promote that. But it's terrible. Yeah, even the... Hold on, I gotta clear my throat again. All right, that should be a little better. Even though the virus has killed 239,000 Americans so far this year, half of eligible adults have said in surveys they don't even know why they need to get the boosters. Well, it's because, these crappy shots that do work, but they expire, basically. The coverage wanes after a number of months. So, people are confused, and I think rightly so about that, because normally you get a vaccine, maybe at most you need to update it annually, but these COVID shots expire after like 4 months. I mean, you'll get some protection after that, but the coverage is down significantly by the third or fourth month mark. So I get why people are confused. Anyway, on to the next page. In 2022, COVID-19 has killed approximately 7,000 people in New York City. For comparison, the NYPD has recorded about 300 murders this year and 1,500 shooting victims. Quote, "A lot of people seem to have kind of moved on," said Luna Lopez, a senior survey analyst at the health policy nonprofit KFF, which conducts monthly national surveys on the vaccines. Well, there's a lot going on right now in terms of the election, the war in Ukraine, and the economy. COVID just isn't as big a presence in people's lives. Well, the war in Ukraine isn't really a big presence in our lives in the U.S. right now, yet it's just what people are being distracted with. But that could soon change as COVID-19 deaths increase overseas, driven in part by newly emergent variants. Remember, there's about 5 strains concurrently surging. That's BQ1, BQ11, CA1, XBB, there's a bunch of them. The same strains are starting to gain a foothold in the U.S. Experts said that an upcoming case surge here feels inevitable, and hospitalizations are already rising in parts of New York. So again, it's like, why New York? New York is always kind of the petri dish for what's going on with COVID, And yeah, it's definitely, there's a big outbreak. How bad the surge gets will depend on people's immunity, either acquired through very recent infections or vaccination. But time out. If you're getting your immunity through infection, that comes at a huge cost. First of all, like the vaccines, it's temporary. People can get a COVID infection now, and it doesn't protect you for very long at all. You can get reinfected 2 or 3 weeks later now. It's not like, in 2020, if you got COVID, maybe you wouldn't get it again for 8 months or something. Well, it's not like that at all now. The variants have mutated to be very immune evasive, and they can reinfect very rapidly. So it's not only temporary, it comes at a huge cost of causing massive organ damage and inflammation in your body, and potentially causing long COVID, even in 1 out of 6 people who are fully vaccinated with a booster. So, it reduces your odds of long COVID, but it does not get them to zero. So, in other words, you still need to mask. In N95 we trust. You have to prevent infection. The vaccine is kind of like, your last line of defense. Well, it's your first line of defense after you get infected. You can also do things like nasal rinses and things like that to flush some of the virus out. But once you get infected, you're relying on your immune system to, that is going to determine how sick you get, basically. But we need to be doing a lot more to prevent infection in the first place. One individual behavior that you can undertake is N95. So anyway, so that natural immunity, it's temporary and comes at a huge cost to your health, possibly taking years off your life. Most Americans, 65% in a recent Ipsos poll, do not want mandates anymore. Do we have them now? And recent research shows that such requirements may not be necessary to motivate booster vaccine rates. Yeah. I mean, that's like the people who want boosters are going to get them. We live in such an incredibly stupid country, and I'm tired of listening to it. Like I said, we're 3 years into a pandemic. Everything's worse. 1 million people have died. Tens of millions of people have some kind of disability or major organ damage from COVID. And you still have people like, I'm not a sheep. I'm not going to live in fear. This country is so stupid. I can't fucking stand it. And of course, the media constantly encourages this. Wait, New York City already gave out 500,000 bivalent boosters. Isn't that good? While 500,000 bivalent boosters over the rollout's first 47 days might sound like a lot, this progress is tiny relative to the original booster rollout a year ago. Over the same time frame, after the CDC opened up eligibility to all adults in mid-November 2021, nearly 1.5 million people took booster doses in New York City. In New Jersey, it was 1.2 million. Another way to think of it, only 7 to 8% of the eligible population has received bivalent boosters in New York City and New Jersey since early September. Quote, I'm not shocked, given, frankly, how quiet the rollout was. Well, again, they don't want... I was going to say, the Democrats don't want it interfering with the midterms. On the other hand, Republicans, think COVID is fake in the first place. So it's just, a country held hostage by just complete cowardice on every front. Ultimately, held hostage by capital. But the responses to the situation, utter cowardice. Just all around. This includes most of the left, by the way, who is utterly silent on this issue. Said Dr. Catherine Milkman, a professor and behavioral scientist at the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School. She studies how psychology can be used to motivate good social behaviors like taking vaccines. She and other researchers said that the low uptake of the bivalent boosters stems from a lack of clear explanations on why the shots are still important, as well as people feeling less urgency around COVID-19, which is exactly what capitalists want people to feel. They want people to feel less urgency around COVID-19. Go out and shop, go out and work, send your kids to school, do everything like normal, like there's not an airborne immune-destroying virus going around that's constantly evolving to get worse. So they're constantly encouraged in that behavior. New York City Health Commissioner Dr. Ashwin Vasan, for example, has spoken out on news programs and press conferences about how the bivalent boosters can provide a few months of protection against getting infected. And again, that's incredibly weak, a few months of protection. I've been reading more about the Novavax vaccine, which is one of the most recently approved in the U.S. It's still not approved for a second booster shot. It's approved for your primary and for the first booster. But there's some data to indicate that that may have more lasting coverage, which would be great. And the FDA needs to approve that. It's already been approved like everywhere else. Canada, EU, Japan, on and on. So anyway, where were we? The updated shots target 2 offshoots of the Omicron variant that dominated the summer, known as BA4 and BA5, as well as the original strain of the virus. And by the way, a lot of the strains now are offshoots of BA2, BA4, and BA5. So like the BQs that I mentioned, those are derived from BA5. BA4.6 is derived from BA4. BA2.75 and 2.752, those are derived from BA2. So yeah, that's what happens when you just let them spread and mutate. Anyway, this burst of immunity in turn can slow the spread of the virus, yet no, you need masking to do this. And again, they just don't want to do anything that's going to make people feel even slightly inconvenienced. This is the population that they've constructed. This is Frankenstein's monster. The, me, gimme now, make everything just egocentric, exactly the way that I like it, make everything super comfortable, make nothing difficult, don't ever make me think, don't ever make me really do anything I don't want to do. This is the population that they've created for the consumerist society that we have today. Now, when you have a public health crisis, what can you do? These people are utterly resistant to anything of the kind. Anyway, yeah, so who are some of the most at risk? People older than 50, people with pre-existing conditions. Yeah, except pre-existing conditions includes things like overweight and obesity, which is 80% of the country. So add in other conditions like diabetes or a heart condition or a lung condition, and it just goes up from there. Quote, we have pop-up vaccination sites, mobile units serving vulnerable New Yorkers, at-home vaccination for eligible New Yorkers, and the health department is deploying its community-based networks to get our city boosters, Gallahue added. We are also actively running advertising campaigns. But parallel messages aren't coming from federal leaders, and it shows. Anyway, that's the end of what I got for you there. This is how it's going. It's a trickle. It's a trickle. And this is going to end up hurting everybody. So let's take a look now at some of the... why is this such a problem? Even if you don't die from COVID, let's take a look at a couple of things here. How about link between COVID and risk of schizophrenia? So we've already covered things like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. This is from SciPost. Severe COVID-19 may increase the risk for schizophrenia. It's by Emily Manis, October 18, 2022. A new study in psychiatry research suggests that experiencing a serious case of COVID-19 is associated with an increased risk of developing schizophrenia. Why? COVID infects the brain directly, so it can cause all kinds of problems. COVID-19 has had massive effects on society and many individuals' health that will continue for years to come. In addition to serious physical health outcomes, it has been shown to be linked to declines in mental health that come from neuropsychological effects of the disease. So this is something rooted in your neurology, your nerves and brain, and then it has psychological effects. COVID-19 can affect the nervous system, metabolism, would be, burning energy basically, and brain function. Despite our increasing knowledge of the negative effects of COVID-19, people have begun a return to, quote, normalcy. Because really, if you're the kind of person who couldn't wait to get back to the way that life was, I don't know that we have a ton in common, you and I, but return to normalcy. Who does that primarily serve? Well, the people who are profiting off of the exploitation that we call normalcy. Anyway, and society has lifted mask mandates. Again, they didn't need to do that, but that crippled the collective response to the pandemic. For their new study, and just directly resulted in lots of virus spreading. We, at a minimum, need mask mandates again. For their new study, Anka Baranova and colleagues utilized data from 2 genome-wide association studies, GWAS, This included one for the SARS coronavirus 2 infection and one for hospitalized COVID-19 cases. Datasets included 122,616 cases of SARS, 32,519 cases of COVID-19, and 53,386 cases of schizophrenia, in addition to controls for each group. A genome-wide association study, or GWAS, is a type of genetic research that looks for associations between genes and particular traits or conditions. Often, GWAS research is used to identify genes that may be involved in certain diseases. The data allowed the researchers to examine the topic using the Mendelian randomization framework. This is a research method that uses genetic variation to study the relationship between exposures, so exposure to some condition, in this case a virus, and outcomes, so whether or not you develop a disease, for example. By comparing the effects of different variants of a gene, researchers can identify which exposures are associated with which outcomes. This approach has several advantages over traditional observational studies. First, it can help to control for confounding variables. Second, it can provide insight into causal relationships. The researchers found that COVID-19 cases that resulted in hospitalization were associated with an 11% increase in risk for developing schizophrenia. So whatever your risk was prior to the hospitalization for developing schizophrenia, you can bump that up by 11%. This points to a poignant need for assessment for schizophrenia as a post-COVID hospitalization protocol. While genetic liability to severe COVID-19 was associated with increased schizophrenia risk, this was not true for genetic liability to SARS coronavirus 2. The risk of schizophrenia from COVID-19 was found to be dependent on severity of the illness. So we find this a lot with long COVID or post-acute COVID sequelae. Sequelae are consequences. So post-acute COVID, what does that mean? The acute stage of COVID is the first few weeks. That's the stage where you're most at risk of like getting pneumonia, getting hospitalized, things like that. But then there's the post-acute phase. And if you get sequelae or consequences in the post-acute phase, that is PAX, or also known as long COVID, and that can range to all kinds of things, heart problems, need for a pacemaker, suppressed T cells in your immune system, liver damage, kidney damage, brain damage, which can result in cognitive deficits, and in this case, schizophrenia. So, this study took steps into better understanding, what I was trying to say there, on the severity of the illness. So, we know that your odds of long COVID go up dramatically if you are hospitalized. They go from like 30-40% if you're unvaccinated, or like 20% if you are vaccinated, maybe 17%. If you're fully vaccinated, odds of getting long COVID, to like 50 or 60% if your COVID is severe enough that you're hospitalized. Much more likely, even more likely than not, to get long COVID if you are hospitalized. Really bad. This study took steps into better understanding a very serious outcome that can occur after a severe coronavirus infection. Despite this, there are limitations to note. One such limitation is that the study only took genetic factors into account. This is significant because it's well known that environment is an important factor in both schizophrenia and COVID-19. So, what your environment is like can affect the kind of deterioration in your health that can determine the severity of both schizophrenia and COVID-19. Additionally, all participants in the GWAS datasets were of European descent, so future research should have a more inclusive sample, so we know that these results are somewhat representative of people of European descent. That may be greater or lesser in other populations that have something of some variations in their genome. The study is titled Severe COVID-19 Increased the Risk of Schizophrenia. Authors were Ancha Baranova, Hongbao Cao, and Fuquan Zhang. All right, so, just a little schizophrenia, nothing to worry about. Can people with schizophrenia lead a satisfactory and fulfilling life? Yes. Can it be much harder to do that with schizophrenia than without it? Yeah, it can be really crippling. One of the, for example, there are medications that can make the symptoms of schizophrenia much easier to deal with and really subside. But the symptoms of schizophrenia can be can often directly interfere with patients taking the medication. It can, for people who experience voices, for example, a lot of times the voices tell them like not to take the medicine and things like that. And so there is like a real risk of spiral there. So anyway, it's a very difficult and potentially debilitating disease. Even people who do well with it oftentimes struggle a lot. So it's something you want to avoid. I think that should be a fairly non-controversial statement. All right, so let's look at some more brain stuff. All right, what do we have here? So this is from Cognitive FX. Now, this is, I believe, like a treatment facility. So we will take this with a certain grain of salt because they do have something to sell. However, somebody was asking recently about, are there treatments for long COVID? This place claims to have treatments for long COVID. We're not going to read so much about that right now. I mean, I'm giving the information here. You can look it up if you feel like. We're going to look at some more of the background information that they have put together. This is by Dr. J.C. Lowen, medically reviewed by Dr. Alina Fong. This is from about 2 months ago, September 9. COVID-19 can cause cognitive symptoms in some patients, such as short-term memory loss, difficulties concentrating, problems recalling words, and brain fog, a condition known as long COVID. So I've had that. I had this through most of 2021 after, I believe, getting sick in December of 2020. And my mind would just go blank a lot. I would not be able to think of words. And just the mind going blank, that was probably the main thing. And also just, I would be in the middle of thinking, and it was like a hand just reached into my mind and just took the thought away. I'd be in the middle of thinking of something and just, boom, it's gone. I would have no idea what I was thinking about. For me, it did, I feel like, clear up, but it took almost an entire year for me to notice a significant improvement. So there's kind of a year where I was operating at way below optimal capacity. It can be really bad. A lot of people are just completely unable to work during that. In fact, a majority of people who experience neurological sequelae from COVID are unable to work. And 50% are unable to do regular daily tasks that they used to be able to do. While most initial studies focused on patients hospitalized with severe COVID symptoms, it became apparent that most long COVID patients developed their condition after only a mild case of COVID. So that would be me. I was not hospitalized. I didn't have, any kind of severe breathing difficulties. I did have shortness of breath, which lasted 6 to 8 months probably. I was not hospitalized, and I got this. So. A new study by Smith et al., published recently in the scientific journal Nature, suggests that even mild cases of COVID can affect the brain. Using magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI, the researchers compared the brains of the same patients before and after they contracted COVID-19. They found changes in the areas of the brain which could tie into common symptoms, including loss of smell and taste, headaches, and memory problems. Multiple media outlets extensively covered this study, but many of these offered the reader little more than a description of the results. As one of the only groups of healthcare providers that offer multidisciplinary long COVID rehabilitation regimens in the U.S., without relying on underperforming medications so far, we can provide more narrative. Not only can we comment on what the recent study showed about post-COVID brain damage, but also we can comment on what we've learned about long COVID cases, I guess from their clinical practice, and how that fits with the Nature paper's discoveries, and what this means for long COVID treatment approaches. So they continue, our treatment was originally designed to help post-concussion patients recover from persistent symptoms. So another kind of brain injury. After just 1 week of treatment, so these are their sort of clinical claims. Like I said, they do have something to sell. It's not to say that it's false or that they're lying, but do keep that in mind. After just 1 week of treatment, over 90% of our patients show improvement. Thus far, we've seen similar results with long COVID patients who pass our current screening criteria. And then, if you are interested in this, they have the contact information there. But let's continue on with the information on long COVID. So even mild COVID cases affect the brain. This is an image from the study in Nature showing the loss of gray matter in the brain after COVID infection. And this particularly happens in areas affecting memory, from what I've read. The Smith et al. Study is one of the first to focus on patients with a mild acute condition. With nearly 800 volunteers, it's also the most extensive COVID-19 study involving brain scans. Researchers from the University of Oxford, UK, administered cognitive tests to and scanned the brains of 785 patients aged 51 to 81. The brain imaging was done as part of the UK Biobank project. This 30-year long-term study started in 2006 to follow 500,000 volunteers aged between 40 and 69 to study how genetics and the environment influence the development of different diseases. Researchers had already scanned more than 40,000 people when the coronavirus pandemic hit, making it the perfect tool to study before and after scans for the same patients. So they had enlisted 40,000 people in this and had done a brain scan, and then they already got the before picture, in other words, which if you didn't know a pandemic was coming, you might not have had, but they were doing this study anyway. The study included 401 patients infected with SARS coronavirus 2 between March 2020 and April 2021. Most of them had a mild case, but 15 were hospitalized, and 2 needed critical care. These patients were initially scanned before the pandemic, between 2014 and 2019, and then again about 4 to 5 months after their COVID-19 diagnosis. 384 volunteers who did not have COVID were also included. This group was matched with the COVID-19 group for age, sex, ethnicity, and the amount of time between scans, as well as risk factors such as blood pressure, obesity, smoking, socioeconomic status, and diabetes. So other things that could affect how their brain is developing. What did the study show? The results clearly show that even mild cases of COVID can have a real impact on the brain. Less than 6 months after the infection, some patients had lost up to 2% of brain volume and gray matter thickness in specific areas of the brain, including the orbitofrontal cortex and the parahippocampal gyrus. So the orbitofrontal cortex, some of your reasoning ability is there, and the hippocampus, again, memory, so this is bad. They explain some of this more in detail. So these losses may explain some of the symptoms experienced by patients with COVID. For example, the orbitofrontal cortex, located at the front of the brain just above the eye sockets, has extensive connections with sensory areas, which may explain the loss of smell and taste. In addition, the parahippocampal gyrus, which sits just above the hippocampus at the base of the neck, plays a vital role in memory, decision-making, and spatial processing, potentially explaining cognitive symptoms such as brain fog, memory loss, and anxiety. For comparison, we all lose brain volume as we get older, but 2% is almost 10 times greater loss than that experienced every year by older adults due to normal aging. So congrats, you got COVID, even mild COVID, you've just aged your brain significantly. That's going to impair your quality of life in all kinds of ways. In addition, patients struggled more on cognitive tests after COVID, possibly caused by atrophy of a specific part of the brain called the cerebellum, a brain structure also linked to cognition. Patients took longer to answer the questions that measured attention, visual screening ability, and processing speed. There were no real differences regarding memory recall, reaction time, or reasoning tests. So some things were affected, again, attention, visual screening ability, and processing speed. Other things were not affected. This isn't the first study to show that COVID can affect cognitive function. Multiple studies show how COVID-19 patients score significantly lower in tests of attention, memory, and executive function than healthy people. We've covered this before, but what's executive function? It's things like, essentially running your life. So planning how you're going to setting goals, planning how you're going to achieve the goals, delaying gratification, and sort of putting things in chronological order, putting together a plan, executing the plan, things like that. One worrying finding was that the differences between the infected and healthy patients increased as the patients got older. So the older you are, the more likely that you're going to have some of the same differences as the younger people, but more profound. The differences were minimal for those in their 50s and 60s, but the gap extended considerably for those in their 70s and 80s. It's difficult to say whether this happens because younger patients recover faster or because they're not affected as severely as older patients. Well, commenting, some of this is because of microhemorrhages in the brain. Generally speaking, your small blood vessels get weaker, not stronger with age, so that may be one reason. How can mild cases of COVID-19 cause these changes? In this study, the authors didn't really explore the causes of these brain changes. However, we've written in the past about how COVID can affect the brain. One of these ways is by disrupting the normal distribution of oxygen and nutrients to the areas of the brain that need it. In a healthy brain, neurons are nerve cells, get oxygen and nutrients from a network of blood vessels that cover the brain. This relationship, called neurovascular coupling, NVC, relies on a complex dynamic signaling system in which the nerve cells request what they need when they need it. However, a COVID infection can disrupt this dynamic. As a consequence, many areas in the brain stop being able to perform their functions. This is called neurovascular coupling dysfunction. As a result, patients experience many physical and cognitive symptoms, including headaches, brain fog, sleep problems, difficulty tracking conversations, difficulty multitasking, and more. Hey, we're just talking about Fetterman and his stroke. Did he have COVID? Did the COVID make him more likely to have the stroke? Well, we know that COVID does increase your risk of stroke, so it's entirely possible. We now have, the COVID candidate on stage. This is not making society better, it's making it worse. Okay. In the Smith et al. Study, one of the main areas affected by the virus was the hippocampus. This area may be particularly vulnerable to neurovascular coupling dysfunction because it relies on adult neurogenesis, a process in which the adult brain produces new brain cells. This is pretty rare. Normally you don't do that, but this area you do. This mechanism can't continue without sustained supply of resources, which neurovascular coupling dysfunction could disrupt. So again, this neurovascular coupling dysfunction, this is cells undergoing their processes, in this case making new brain cells, or it could just be things like, respiration and normal things that the cell needs to do to generate energy for itself and whatever else the cells are doing. And if it's not able to send out the signals to other cells in the system to get the stuff that it needs, then it's not going to get that stuff, and things are going to go awry. At first, researchers believed that this process didn't serve any purpose, but recent evidence shows that adult neurogenesis is particularly important to form recurrent but different short-term memories, such as where you left your car keys today instead of where you left them yesterday. In short, mild cases of COVID may cause these changes in brain tissue because the virus disrupts normal NVC in the hippocampus and surrounding areas. In turn, this may block the process of neurogenesis and lead to brain shrinkage and progressive cognitive decline and short-term memory loss. The same tissue damage can be detected in aging patients and those with neurodegenerative disorders such as Alzheimer's disease or traumatic brain injuries. So other possible causes, I'm going to summarize these quickly. They list inflammation because in some patients, COVID triggers severe immune response through a hyperactive immune response. So you can get a cytokine storm, you can get uncontrolled inflammation. The next one is direct viral infection of brain cells. The route of entry for the virus to reach the brain is still not clear. So I thought that this was better established. I'm surprised that they're saying that actually. But direct viral infection of brain cells, which can kill the cells. So coming to the conclusion here, is brain damage from mild COVID reversible or irreversible? In the Smith et al. Study, the interval between the original SARS coronavirus 2 infection and the second round of imaging was less than 6 months. This period is not enough to determine if the loss of gray matter and other cognitive deficits would persist and develop into LongCOVID or reverse back into normal. It's possible that the cognitive changes caused by the virus may endure for a long time. For example, a report found that 12 months after their infection, older adults in Wuhan, China, were still showing signs of cognitive impairment. In contrast, their spouses, who were not infected with the virus and worked as a control group, did not show these same symptoms. Last panel here. However, as the abnormal changes are associated with loss of smell, it's plausible that once patients recover their sense of smell, they also regain their cognitive function. though not everybody does. A study found that although patients were still experiencing some cognitive difficulties 6 months after their infection, there was a marked improvement in neurological and cognitive function since the illness. All that said, we found that many symptoms of long COVID are reversible with treatment. Again, this is a claim that this particular clinic is making. Most are not making this claim. That's because neurovascular coupling dysfunction and many of the conditions associated with it, such as vision problems, are reversible. So this article actually goes on to explain more of what their clinic does. I'm not here to do a commercial for them, though. I just want to be clear about that. All right, one more COVID article, and then we'll go into the chat. I got to get something to drink here. No idea what's going on in the chat. We'll find out in a few minutes. All right, so this is the final article. There's some really interesting stuff in this one. In Cleveland and beyond, this is from cleveland.com, researchers begin to unravel the mystery of long COVID. Updated October 24, so recent. Dr. Grace McComsey is pictured there, Vice President of Research and Associate Chief Scientific Officer at UH. Currently leads the RECOVER study investigating the underpinnings of long COVID. So this is more from a place that is trying to treat COVID and to study long COVID. So again, this gets to some of the question we had the other day about, what can be done to treat it. And, the research is ongoing. All right, this is by Gretchen Kuda-Krohn. Cleveland, Ohio. Roughly a third of adults who get COVID-19 report having had what is considered long COVID. And months after the initial infection, a staggering number of those who haven't recovered, which is up to 80%, have some trouble carrying out their daily activities. A Brookings report from August said that a conservative estimate, that maybe an undercount or underestimate, was that 16 million people were suffering from long COVID-19 at that time. The CDC says it may be as high as 19 million adults. I would probably go higher. But whether 16 million or 19 million or let's say higher, one thing is clear, there are a lot of them. Here in Cleveland and across the country, scientists and doctors are trying to figure out what's wrong and how to help them. And then, of course, in a country like the United States, where we don't have universal health care, how much they can gouge you for it. The symptoms that fall under the long COVID umbrella include everything from a persistent loss of taste and smell to fatigue so disabling that the affected person is unable to return to work or daily life. In between, there are reports of brain fog, headaches, chronic GI issues, increased incidence of diabetes, blood clots, heart arrhythmias, and intolerance to exercise. A lot of people have intolerance to exercise, but this is like people who normally would exercise suddenly find that they can't. So I want to mention also that the loss of taste and smell, that's one thing. What a lot of people with long COVID also report, and fortunately, I love food. I have not had this, but it's not just loss of taste and smell, anosmia. It is a distortion of taste and smell to where everything tastes like garbage, like things will taste rotten. So people are having trouble eating at all because everything that they put in their mouth tastes like literal garbage, like they're eating out of a toilet. So this is a real thing that's happening with COVID. But hey, let it rip, right? To the untrained eye, the list of symptoms is dizzying and appears specific to each individual patient. However, behind the scenes, and thus far largely out of media fanfare, we'll add including on the left, researchers and clinicians have doggedly made strides in not only classifying and defining what long COVID is, but also in identifying the underlying mechanism of the disorder and how they might treat it. One of the largest centers of research is right here in our own backyard at University Hospital's Cleveland Medical Center and Metro Health System. The economic impact from the sheer volume of American workers who could be permanently disabled is troubling. In fact, it was of such concern that in December 2020, Congress gave more than $1 billion to the National Institutes of Health to fund research on the prevention and treatment of long COVID. Sorry. There we go. University Hospitals and Metro Health System jointly was the recipient of one of the 15 grants the NIH subsequently awarded to research institutions around the country. Currently counts itself as the largest in terms of the number of subjects. To date, they've enrolled over 800 patients. They hope to add 300 to 400 more. The goal, said McComsey, is to uncover so-called biomarkers of COVID disease, any sort of measurable biological change that could identify and ultimately separate out patients who had an acute COVID infection and then continued to experience COVID symptoms months after they no longer tested positive. So we did a story about this recently where researchers in Boston found that the spike protein is a biomarker in 60% of cases. But in 40% of the cases, people had long COVID, they couldn't find the spike protein. So there may be multiple things causing long COVID, it's unclear. But in a majority of the people who had long COVID, they had detectable spike protein, which suggests a long-term low-level infection. But again, the research is ongoing. McComsey said that over the last year, they and the other researchers around the country have collected samples of blood, saliva, urine, or stool and cataloged the progression of symptoms from patients with and without COVID. Eerily similar to HIV. So listen up, folks. McComsey, who has spent the last 2 decades studying HIV, that would be the virus that causes AIDS, said that the data they have found so far paints a picture that is eerily familiar. Quote, now I just look at it and I'm like, gosh, it's like deja vu, McComsey said. If the idea that the behavior of the SARS coronavirus 2 might have any similarities to HIV is news to you, you aren't alone, though not if you've been listening to S4A. But McComsey said that for the HIV researchers who have made the crossover to studying this new coronavirus, SARS coronavirus 2, the similarities that emerged were unmistakable. To be clear, McComsey isn't suggesting that the viruses themselves are similar. Coronaviruses are not retroviruses like HIV, nor, well, they can be sexually transmitted actually, but anyway, they're obviously also non-sexually transmitted, but my understanding was that, let me look this up real quick, because I'm pretty sure that SARS coronavirus 2 is in semen, so let us see. Yeah, so first result is from PubMed. SARS coronavirus 2 in the semen, where does it come from? The recent report of SARS coronavirus 2 presence in semen samples of 6 patients, including 2 subjects who were recovering from the clinical disease. I know that it infects the... So the type of receptor that SARS coronavirus 2 typically gains access to your cells through is the ACE2 receptor, and there's a lot of them in the male reproductive system. So yeah, there's definitely detection of SARS coronavirus 2 in semen of COVID-19 positive males. There's another one. This is from clud.tibet.org. SARS coronavirus 2 viable 21 days in blood, mucus, semen, urine, but just 24 hours in what? In something. I have to click that now. But yeah, so it seems that there is viable coronavirus. 24 hours in what? In breast milk and feces. Okay. So yeah, 3 weeks in nasal mucus, saliva, sputum, tears, saliva, blood, urine, and semen. So yeah, it is sexually transmitted, or it can be sexually transmitted as well. All right, just wanted to clear that up. But it's also, airborne as well, unlike HIV. But it's the way that they make the people they infect sick that caught her attention. It hides in the body and continues to wreak havoc in the various organ systems by driving inflammation and disrupting the immune response. So this is talking about SARS coronavirus 2. It hides in the body, continues to wreak havoc in your organs. Quote, HIV patients don't die from the virus itself. They die from immune activation, from the high levels of inflammation that causes cancer, heart disease, liver, and kidney disease, she said. The only reason we cannot cure HIV is because the virus hides where the HIV drugs can't go after it. So it continues to fuel this high inflammation. That's why somebody like me, who has been studying HIV for the last 20 years, found that COVID is extremely similar to HIV. It's a virus that produces a lot of inflammation. We see a lot of conditions that are known to stem from inflammation, and we now have some evidence that it persists in different organs. McComsey is referring to various published research papers that suggest that the SARS coronavirus 2 may linger in various organ tissues long after nasal swabs and blood tests come back negative. So the gut, I believe, is one of the big reservoirs of coronavirus. This is one of the reasons why China was doing anal swabs for people coming into the country, because they really wanted to quarantine anybody carrying COVID in until the infection passed. And apparently that was, more reliable of a method than doing the nasal swabs. So anyway, an early preprint autopsy study from the NIH has found the virus throughout the body in a wide range of tissues, including muscle, fat, gut, and brain tissue of patients who died with COVID, and in some cases in those who were asymptomatic or had mild infections and died many months later. This proving, the authors say, that SARS coronavirus 2 is capable of persisting in the body for many months after infection. Another study further suggests that the SARS coronavirus 2 virus may have stolen yet another page from the HIV playbook, hijacking ancient and normally dormant human DNA sequences to reverse engineer its viral RNA and insert itself into the genomes of our cells. Although the paper was originally met with a firestorm of criticism, some scientists do not find their theory so implausible, McComsey among them. Quote, "It is a big possibility," she said. "I would say it is very possible, even likely." This has resulted in fearmongering about the possibility that RNA-based COVID sequences in vaccines might somehow integrate themselves into our DNA via the same mechanism. Due to the fact that vaccines only contain a small portion of the complete viral sequence, the authors and most scientists agree that this is unlikely. Untangling long COVID-19, initial findings. The NIH-funded study McComsey directs is called RECOVER. First of all, I wish that they had gone into that more because, for example, there's evidence that not just inflammation in general, but that COVID directly infects T cells and kills them, resulting in reduced cell counts. We'll see what else they say here. The NIH-funded study that McComsey directs is called RECOVER, an acronym that stands for Researching COVID to Enhance Recovery, and has uncovered some important pieces of information. First, it found that people with long COVID-19 are primarily women. Around 75% of McComsey's nearly 900 subjects are women, and not by choice. "We don't go looking for them," she said. "These are the people who are calling us." Second, researchers have found that although one's risk of developing long COVID increases with the severity of the initial infection, people can and do develop long COVID even after infections that were considered asymptomatic, that were asymptomatic or were considered mild. Third, vaccination dramatically reduces a person's chances of developing long COVID. A fully vaccinated individual is 5 times less likely to continue to have any symptoms or ill effects 3 months after their initial infection compared to someone who has not been vaccinated. And that, said McComsey, makes a strong case for continued vaccination. "I'm not afraid of getting acute COVID," she said. "I'm worried about getting long COVID." And finally, researchers have discovered that patients with long COVID generally have symptoms that fall into 3 categories or phenotypes: fatigue, neurocognitive symptoms such as brain fog or headaches, and cardiovascular symptoms such as shortness of breath, heart arrhythmias, that's your heart beating irregularly, exercise intolerance, and blood clots. Patients may have more than one type. Some also have symptoms like constipation, diarrhea, or loss of taste and smell that don't seem to fit neatly into one of those 3 groups, although you could say that loss of taste and smell are, well, it's not neurocognitive per se, but it's neurological. One explanation for the different groups of symptoms is the lingering presence of the virus in specific tissues. So it may persist in the body, but not everywhere. And where it lingers, it presumably continues to reignite an inflammatory response. It can do that in different ways, by the way. We've covered this before. COVID, of course, can stimulate your immune system, and inflammatory responses are part of your immune system. So you're doing inflammation in the attempt to fight the thing. So that's one source of it. But there's another way in which the spike protein itself can interact. It basically mimics one of the chemicals that initiates your inflammatory response. So the spike protein itself can just, it has a skeleton key to your inflammatory response and you can just turn it on by itself. That's really bad for you. For example, someone who has headaches or brain fog may have a virus that resides in their brain tissue, lingers there, whereas someone with cardiovascular symptoms may have the virus present lingering in their heart, lungs, or blood vessels. And a chronically heightened immune response and widespread inflammation throughout the entire body may partially explain why so many, more than 50% of long COVID sufferers, experience the devastating fatigue. So again, I mentioned I had long COVID. Fatigue for me during the acute stage was one of the biggest things. Come 3 or 4 p.m., I had to lie down every single day, and I really couldn't get up. I would basically rest for an hour or two, and then it'd be like, okay, I have a little bit of energy. I would get up for 5 or 10 minutes, and I would have to lie down for another hour or two. So this eventually cleared up for me, but for some people it doesn't. According to McComsey, the research on biomarkers, which is still ongoing, may yet help to tease these subtypes apart, differentiate what's causing these different symptoms of long COVID. She said that anyone who currently has COVID-19 or has been infected within the past 30 days is invited to join the study. They want to track the changes in these biomarkers along with symptoms from the time of infection until symptoms resolve and beyond. And they still need several hundred subjects. She said it also doesn't matter if you've had COVID before, because one of the things they hope to learn is whether the chances of developing long COVID increase with each subsequent exposure. Coming up with the treatment. Meanwhile, she said that in the next few months, they plan to begin the second phase of their research, testing treatments. These treatments may take many forms, including anti-inflammatory medications, but the initial clinical trials will likely be antiviral drugs targeted specifically against SARS coronavirus 2. The idea is that if the symptoms of long COVID-19 are the result of the virus hiding in various body tissues, then the obvious course of action is to root it out and destroy it. Of course, that may be easier said than done, especially if any of that rooting is required in the brain. Although several types of viruses can easily infect the brain, thanks to something called the blood-brain barrier, antiviral drugs have a much harder time penetrating the brain from the bloodstream. So yeah, this is, if you're not familiar with the blood-brain barrier, it is something that basically filters the brain off from various chemicals. It's not easy for, and some chemicals cannot pass the blood-brain barrier. They have to be metabolized into something else, etc. So there's extra challenge, in other words, in getting things into the brain. You can't just put it in the bloodstream and assume it's going to get into the brain. Sometimes the blood-brain barrier keeps it out. This problem has been the bane of HIV clinical research for decades. 2 more screens. Progress with the research, but no guarantees. McComsey stressed that although they have made significant progress, there's still quite a long way to go, and there are no guarantees. For example, it's possible that the SARS coronavirus 2 virus does organ damage, activates other dormant viruses in the body, or that it causes permanent and irreversible changes to the balance of the immune system that lead to chronic bouts of inflammatory disorders, even in the absence of the virus. Let's read that again. For example, it is possible that the SARS coronavirus 2 virus does organ damage, activates other dormant viruses in the body, or that it causes permanent and irreversible changes to the balance of the immune system, leading to chronic bouts of inflammatory disorders, even after the virus is gone. Quote, unfortunately, it could be that antivirals may only attenuate it, or even not do anything, she said. That's why the study is looking at anti-inflammatory drugs as well. Because whether the virus is there or not, it's the inflammation that is a lot of the problem you're dealing with. She said that she knows that for those who are suffering without answers or treatments, the wait can be very difficult. Many patients can feel abandoned when their physicians can't do anything for them and are wondering why it takes so long, let alone physicians don't even recognize long COVID. Doctors want to get it right, some of them anyway, McComsey said, and unfortunately that takes time. Well, I think you're giving a little too much credit to some doctors, but anyway. Meanwhile, she hopes that at least by knowing that an effort's being made toward a treatment, they can begin to feel heard. Quote, people who enroll in the study always say that one of their stressors is that their physician thought that they were exaggerating the symptoms. And again, doctors not listening to and not believing their patients, just fucking stop. It's like doctors so often just get a God complex about, they're the healers of the sick and whatever. And the reality is they're just bringing over all kinds of class and racial and other gender prejudices into their practice that they wind up effectively just looking down their nose and sneering at their patients. And, patients pick up on that. Anyway, I think now most people know that this is real. It's very real. Yet at the same time, there's doctors' offices not requiring masks. So yes and no. Anyway, there's information there. If you're in that area to volunteer or learn more about the Recover study, call 440-762-6843. There's also 440-76-COVID or email covidresearch@uhhospitals.org. Okay. There we go. Let's thank the patron. Patreon.com/socialism for all. You can get your name on the screen like these fine folks. I would make content even if nobody supported, but the support lets me spend a lot more time on it. But speaking of time is a bit short. I'm going to leave the patrons' names up while we go back into the chat and catch up for whatever 20 minutes or half an hour that's going to take. And then we're going to wrap up the stream for today. So where were we? And looking at the chat, boy, there's a big lag between my recording and what's actually going on that people see. There's like at least a 10-second delay. All right. And, okay, where were we? Yeah, I swear the chat, when I was saying I was having like deja vu before, the chat repeated itself. I don't know what is going on with Twitch today, but that's strange. Ooh, we got some trolls here for sure. A leftist trick. Let's talk about projection for a minute, because we've got 15 drinks in talking about a leftist trick is to make it so that facts are no longer valued. That is pure projection. Just complete and utter projection. I don't even know how else to comment on that. Yeah, drunk old man in the chat, absolutely. Somebody let Jimmy Dore in here. Yeah, as far as the left, I thought the right did that with the whole refusing to believe in climate change and refusing to get vaccinated despite scientists saying that it's safe. I said nothing about policies, I just said that the right ignores facts. They try to silence the existence of gay and trans people, etc. Yeah. But anyway, let's we got a huge influx of people. There's still 71 people in the chat right now, and many of you probably are unfamiliar with how we've been doing it, which is don't feed the troll. So anyway. Oh boy, there's a ton of junk in the chat now. It's pretty insane that I still hear people describe COVID as essentially just a cold. I mean, people just, they're on this death march towards oblivion. They want to believe everything's fine. Oh, you people are all alarmists. Capitalism's fine. COVID's fine. Climate change is fine. Pollution is fine. 94% of the animals in Latin America and the Caribbean disappearing, fine. 70% of animal life around the known world disappearing, fine. That's going to be the refrain right up to the end. Either we interrupt that and introduce a new dominant narrative, or that's going to continue until the end of the earth. One of the two. That's what it's going to be. Long COVID symptoms sound like multiple sclerosis and lupus symptoms, typical autoimmunity shit. Yeah, there's definitely, that's one of the other leading theories, is that COVID initiates autoimmunity, where your immune system is reacting against your own tissue as if it is not your own tissue. Respectfully shove your vote blue no matter who back in the liberal trash can where you found it. Yep. I had raids turned off for this reason. Honestly, I opened them up. I might just close them back down. I'd rather have a small chat of people who are actually focused than the kind of just like off the rails stuff that's going on in here today. Yeah, the Democratic Party has had ample opportunity to codify abortion rights into law. We covered this in a previous stream. Actually, okay, I think we've thanked the patrons enough for it today. I just don't want people to like get distracted by that. But there, keep it a little simpler. Yeah, we've covered this before. So Obama said that. Let's get that up there now. So Obama, when running in 2007. Promised Planned Parenthood that, quote, the first thing I would do as president would be to sign the Freedom of Choice Act, which effectively codifies Roe v. Wade. Now, in 2009, he said that the bill is, quote, not my highest legislative priority, as he put it in a recent news conference. So, Biden, the exact same thing. Do I have a... I don't know if I have the screenshot anymore. Biden literally said the exact same thing. Like, oh, vote for us in the midterms, and then we'll finally, you can have some human rights as a treat. This is the Democratic Party. Don't trust them ever. Like, they use some better rhetoric than the Republicans, but they don't deliver. No matter how many times Democrats get into power, things keep getting worse. That's why, however you vote, if we don't build another party, things are going to keep getting worse. Bottom line. You need to let the Democratic Party, start seeing it for what it is. All right. So that is the end of today's stream. I'm turning raids back off because this was a shit show. This was kind of a disaster today. But anyway, thanks, I guess, to the people who were here. And I'm sure that this was a frustrating experience for some of the people who are used to the way that the stream and interaction with it. Like, we had a great stream 2 days ago, but this was riddled with problems. I really just wanted to cover the rest of those COVID stories. And again, it was a struggle. But anyway, I mean, not that this was a total loss, but I'd say not one of the better streams. I will keep that in mind going back into when we pick up on Tuesday next week.